This video is going to be different from most of my other work. Normally, I talk about media that is widely consumed by most mainstream audiences, especially audiences in my country of the United States. And while this is also going to be the case for most fans of webcomics, I still think that this is a piece of work that most people should have on their radar. So this is going to be one of those times where I want you to pause the video, go check out this beautiful webcomic, and come back as soon as possible. Or don't come back. As long as you give this comic a look, I'm going to be satisfied. Just check the links in the description. Support and follow this artist on Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon. Just do nice things for yourself and treat yourself to this beautiful webcomic. Okay? Have you done it? Well, if you need some convincing. Poo, the Tamil word for flower, is a webcomic about Sabur and Jamil, two Muslim roommates who later fall in love and begin a relationship. This comic is the creation of artist Nabigal-Nayagam Haider Ali, known simply online as Nabi. And apologies for any pronunciations that I, a middle-class white guy from America, am sure to deliver with 100% accuracy. A majority of Poo centers around the flourishing romance between Sabur and Jamil, as well as the struggles they and their other LGBTQ friends deal with while living in Tamil Nadu, India. And not just the homophobia and transphobia that is still commonplace for most LGBTQ individuals, but also dealing with the difficult backgrounds that can be seen all throughout Southeast Asia. Sabur is from a strict Brahmin family, before converting to Twelver Shi'i as well as Sufism, causing him to abandon both his family and his arranged marriage. Jamil, who is Hanafi Sunni, still feels some residual guilt for his mother's death, which he feels was made worse by his status as a trans man. And if you're unsure about going into this without knowing these distinctions of Islam and Hinduism, don't worry, I was still trying to learn more about this too. But if the background to this story feels so unfamiliar to someone like me, why even talk about it? Well, alongside the amazing artistry that is on display within Nabi's artwork, something that feels especially interesting with Poo is how it feels somewhat unprecedented in the ways that it chooses to address representation. Hear me out. Putting religious representation aside for a moment, something that differentiates Poo from a lot of other works depicting LGBTQ individuals is seen within the setting. Like most other places in the world, the attitudes towards LGBTQ individuals in Tamil Nadu, and by extension India at large, has been complicated. On one hand, the Indian state has made considerable strides with civil rights for trans and gender non-conforming people, with the establishment of the Transgender Welfare Board, which distributes housing, SRS, and funding for their trans people within the region. On the other hand, most of the LGBTQ presence in India isn't well represented within the government and Tamil culture at large. It was only in 2018 that homosexuality was decriminalized by the Indian Supreme Court, and when researching the most prominent Indian films depicting LGBTQ relationships, some of the most prominent results included films like Dostana, a film about two men pretending to be gay in order to share an apartment with the woman they are attracted to. Compare this to how LGBTQ people are treated within predominantly Muslim countries like Iran and Pakistan. On one hand, there is also a similar level of hostility and bigotry directed towards LGBTQ individuals from such communities, which many of the worst people on the internet can't shut up about for some reason. But Nabi himself has pointed out how he also converted from Hinduism to Islam when he was much younger, because there are many Shiite scholars out there who have worked to provide spaces and acceptance for trans people. And since we're talking about religion, despite the apprehension some characters like Sabur have to certain religions, they are still good friends like people like Mukil, Noor, and Alamu, three of the most prominent side characters. Noor, like Jamil, is Hanafi Sunni, but also a lawyer that defends the rights of LGBTQ individuals throughout Tamil Nadu. She is in a secret relationship with Alamu, a Brahmin woman who hid her sexuality by platonically marrying her friend Sundar. They also have a friend that is a Dalit trans woman named Mukil, aka one of the biggest badasses in this entire story, Cherish this woman, holy crap. Throughout many civil rights circles, there is the common conversation of intersectionality, the acknowledgement of individualization within marginalized groups. A common misconception that falls on those who fight for equality is the misconception of fighting for one group's rights in favor of another's. And while I don't want to deny the existence of such ideologies, to say that this is the common motivation for all ignores an absolute truth for any empathetic person. We all have the ability to care about multiple things. That is to say that my desire to see sexual assault decline doesn't mean that I can't criticize those who think discriminating against trans people is the answer for that. My desire to see wages go up doesn't stop me from longing for a world where one's capital doesn't determine your capacity to have a happy life. And it certainly means that my criticisms against the ways organized religions can harm others doesn't stop me from wanting others to worship however they want, should they choose to do so. We all can care about multiple things. And ultimately, the amount of interaction between these characters can ultimately demonstrate what intersectionality is all about. Being able to acknowledge everyone's complicated facets that make up their own identity in order to help make the world a better place for them and everyone else. And this is why I wanted to talk about this series. Not just because of the ways it can show how these issues intersect across backgrounds, but because it provides something that not a lot of media with LGBT characters doesn't always provide. And that is the conviction for happiness. Now, think about the most popular works that depict LGBTQ people. Okay, ones where they're the actual focus of the story. Okay, ones that don't promote unhealthy relationship dynamics or fetishizes them. Okay, how many of them are made by actual LGBT people? Okay, do any of them involve people of color? Okay, how about any trans or non-binary people? Okay, good. How many of them take place out of first world Western countries? But are they from those countries? Okay, now, there might be a lot of great stories in that mix, but I do have one last question. How many of those stories end with the characters staying together and not dying? For a lot of fellow cis straight people, this is something that you could easily take for granted. But for those who consume a lot of LGBT media, you know how shockingly commonplace this is. In 2016, the website Autostraddle did a poll marking the presence of LGBTQ women in television, where they took a sample size of 1,779 scripted shows from 1976 to 2016. Of those shows, there were 193 shows that featured LGBTQ women, and of those shows, 35% of them would go on to feature the death of a gay character, and only 16% of those shows will give them a happy ending. And while it would be interesting to see similar studies conducted with a larger sample size and more variety in LGBTQ representation, I hope this demonstrates how prevalent this has become. This phenomenon, often called the bury your gays trope, has been something that has been more apparent with each subsequent appearance. For many people, it feels like there is a ticking clock for any LGBTQ characters before they inevitably go off into that sweet goodnight with all the proper levels of tragedy. And interestingly enough, Pooh almost went in this direction. The original story was going to center on Sabor being killed after being framed for being a terrorist, where Jamil would dance to cope with his death. But after some time, Nabi decided against this. Quote, "The initial storyline recycled the bury your gays trope that a lot of popular media engages with, where LGBT plus characters often end up dying as part of the story. It didn't help my own mental health either, since I'm a queer person myself, to kill Sabor off. And that's where I had to rethink the whole story." While I don't think that going in this direction would automatically make this story bad, I do think that this departure from the status quo helped to make this story go from good to great. Sure, killing off a character is usually a good source of drama when it's unexpected, but the sheer ubiquity of this trope has drained any potential character deaths of all their drama. replacing any sadness or investment with disinterest and annoyance. Oddly enough, I personally find that stories with LGBT characters become a lot more compelling once you remove the possibility of a cheap death. And Nabi seems to agree with this statement, considering that he's been more than happy to disclose that Jamil and Sabor survived this story. According to him, the spoilers of a story shouldn't have to revolve on whether an LGBT plus character survives or not. That's not a good shock factor at all. Whenever we examine fiction within the context of the real world, it can be really tempting to create narratives that mirror real-world injustices. While such narratives can help make audiences empathize with the struggles of marginalized individuals, to say that others will only listen through suffering doesn't really go on to help that many people. Rather, it can run the risk of perpetuating such injustices. To be perfectly clear, being an LGBT individual shouldn't make you prepared to become a martyr for the rights of LGBT people. And the same goes for people of color, members of non-dominant religions, and those who are differently abled or lower classed. Any movement that seeks out equality doesn't deserve to have martyrs. But sadly, we do live in a world built on the backs of forgotten martyrs. But Pooh shows us that we shouldn't have to make our characters needlessly suffer in order to discuss the realities of the world. Can it not just be simple enough to see characters of different backgrounds living together and thriving together by supporting each other? Isn't that sort of love sacred enough? Well, to end on a quote from the comic, I know it's hard to live being this way. No matter how sacred you are, how lovely you are, you can never prove yourself to those who don't care. But there are those who will lift you up, help you grow until you blossom into a garden. And that is sacred enough. Thank you for watching. Best wishes.